All right, hey guys, Ridgeway here. So we're going to be now diving in really to the second half, or really the actual then start of the American Revolution, and we will do all of it here within this assignment, and we'll talk about then what you'll be turning in for your work when you're done with it. But again, please use this video lecture. You can pause it, fast forward, rewind as you need to be as we are going through things. Okay, so our goal here is pretty straightforward, which is just to actually walk through the events of the revolution itself, at least the broad strokes of it, things that you need to know so that, if somebody asks you about it, you don't sound dumb, right? So essential questions, we're going to be looking here at, particular events, causes, and then some of the, bigger picture things that we need to consider when looking at this conflict, okay? So with that in mind, let's talk about then what happens after the coercive acts. So pretty much this is where, again, all we're waiting for at this moment is for something to occur that is going to actually get, things going. And what is going to start that officially is kind of basically like a meeting between, no, I shouldn't say a meeting, a good discussion back and forth between the Continental Congress and Britain. You're like, what's the Continental Congress? Well, this is where, for the first time, besides the Stamp Act Congress, where delegates are going to be sent from all the different colonies in the Americas. There's a couple that don't meet, but not important for our time here. And they will write up this Declaration of Rights and Grievances to the king. You can pretty much think of this as like a, here's all the problems that we have. And then they add this little thing that says, please repeal the coercive acts, right? And then they add this little thing at the end that, hey, if you don't, we're going to cut off all importing from you. And when Britain gets this Declaration of Rights and Grievances and they send it over to the king, King George just, they're done, right? They reject the Americans' demands, and we are off to the races, basically. And now, in terms of the actual first conflict that will occur after the Continental Congress, we'll get to that in a second, but let's back up in here, just take a broader kind of big picture perspective about what this all means. So what exactly then starts the revolution? What is the exact cause? To this day, depending on the historian that you ask, you're going to get a wide variety of answers about what the American Revolution was actually an expression of. Some are going to point to the Enlightenment and the ideas about freedom and equality and popular sovereignty being, the real engine for it. Other folks are going to say that this is an early example of class conflict. We have merchants who are trying to look out for their own economic self-preservation, and they're simply using all of these, little events to rile up the common folk. Other folks have said, no, it's not that at all. It's Britain not knowing how to properly manage its empire. It just butchered the job. The thing that I want you to remember out of all of this is that once the American Revolution starts, don't think that just means all of a sudden the colonies are like, okay, we're all united and we're all going for independence. It takes absolute just years to get to that point, and there are bitter debates that go on and forth, back and forth between the different colonies about what the outcome of this should be and how it should be conducted. And that even happens after the first shots are fired. Although, of course, as time goes on, it will become clear that that goal, that I word independence, is really the only option out of that is left for the colonies at some point. Okay, so what exactly then kind of kicks off the conflict? In terms of besides the Continental Congress and Britain, kind of shouting at each other across the ocean, it's going to be Lexington and Concord. Okay, so the quick, just again, high-level 2-minute summary of what happens here is that the British, again, because most of this is centered on Boston still at this point, they are going to go after some of the colonial troublemakers, as they call them. Folks like, for example, Sam Adams. Yes, it is the same person who the beer is named after, but he never called himself Sam Adams. Whole different, rabbit hole we could go down there. This is where we get Paul Revere's famous Midnight Ride. Please click the link down below, and you can watch an Adam Ruins Everything on how he myths bust that quite heavily. Revere is not exactly the person who you probably have been told who he is. He's much less significant and has a much more complicated story than you might assume. So what happens here? So basically, the British go after some of these powder supplies and some of these troublemakers who they see as causing problems. They do capture some of them, such as Revere. But basically, besides destroying some supplies and some other things like that, they basically, on their way back to Boston, after marching all the way out to Lexington and Concord, they just get swarmed by Minutemen, who are these like irregular militia. Think like Jim Bob, who just woke up and his neighbor came and knocked on his door and let him know that the regulars were coming, and then they go and they will kind of peck at the British all the way back to Boston. Lexington and Concord very famously is where it's the shot heard around the world, where the American Revolution will begin. But this is really the first indication that we have that this is going to be now an armed conflict, and it's not going to be changing from that point. Okay. So I'd like you to answer this on Pear Deck, something that you learned from the Adam Ruins Everything video that confirmed or challenged what you knew about Paul Revere. Okay, so answer that on Pear Deck, and then continue on with me for the rest of this. So high level, again, we're not going to focus on every event that happens here in the American Revolution. We simply just don't have time. Let's talk about some of the high level advantages and disadvantages for each side. So for Great Britain, they are way better organized, way better funded, even though they're in debt. You can always borrow more money, right? They can buy foreign soldiers from places like Germany. If you've heard of the Hessians before, that's who that is. And Britain, broadly speaking, has a much more united government and different kind of perspective on seeing the war through, okay? The number one largest disadvantage you need to be aware of for Great Britain is that they're trying to conduct this war from all the way overseas. And although the crown will give broad authority to a lot of the generals who are in the Americas to make decisions on their own, if there is like a massive change in tactical approach, or for example, let's say one of the generals is like, hey, we need, X number more soldiers, right, from Britain. That takes 3 months to get back across the Atlantic, and then another 3 months to get back the other way at minimum. And so that slow communication time period, in those 6 months, conditions could have completely changed, right? And so that makes things very, very hard. And there's one other disadvantage we can mention here, and that is there's always another European country that is more than happy at any given time to kind of stick it to the British. And we'll talk more about the French later. So what's the advantages and disadvantages for the colonists then? Yes, they are fighting with home field advantage. There is something to that, sure. You're going to be able to rely more upon, you would think, the local population than you might not. The other thing that from a large strategic standpoint that you have to keep in mind here is that the Americans don't have to invade Britain and kill the king, and no. All they have to do to win the revolution is just stay alive. They don't have to go and defeat all of Britain's armies. That's not required, right? All that you have to do for victory is just keep the fight going for long enough until the British give up, right? Now, disadvantages for the colonists, and they're huge. They have no reliable tax revenue, and also because the colonists hate taxes, it's really difficult for them to get money for fighting. And they're also, especially until like the last couple years of the Revolution, they are extremely disorganized and underfunded. Okay, just again to bring that point up again, and they're really not supported by other European states. Again, we'll talk about France here in a minute, and Spain and a few other countries. Until the end of the war, really until the halfway point and afterwards in the war, okay? So that's going to make things really hard for folks like Washington who are trying to see this war through, because, again, you're not getting reliable funding and organization and other things that you need. Also, something quick to note, the colonists are not unified in again, once the revolution goes. How the numbers typically break down is that out of all the colonists, about 15 to 20% were loyal to the crown. Okay, we'd say call them loyalists. Rebels or patriots would then compose about 50% of the population. And then about 30% of the colonists do what every single fan does during the Super Bowl, which is they don't say anything at all, or they switch sides depending on how things are going, right? Like everybody roots versus Tom Brady when he would get to the Super Bowl because you root for an underdog, right? Or things like that. They're bandwagoners, or they would kind of switch to seeing which way the wind is blowing. But there's lots of different factors that affected how people chose particular sides. It could have been based on particular income levels, like, how their businesses were affected by different British, interventions. It could have been their religious background. If they were Anglican, they're much more likely to be related to the crown. It could have been their regional affiliations, their ethnic backgrounds. Like, again, it just goes on, right? So there's lots of different things that kind of influenced how a person made their particular loyalties felt in a given context. So what I'd like you to do right here is write something important, write the most important thing that you got out of this lesson here for today, okay, so far. And, okay, then to wrap things up, okay, we will talk about the wrapping up the war very briefly if we have time. I think we will run out of time, unfortunately, before we get things too far. But what I'd like you to do is to actually, for your assignment and what you're going to be completing for this lesson, is to take a look at a micro level of one person going through the American Revolution. And so on this next slide, what I have here for you is I have a bunch of different story maps. Now, I do have a rule here that I don't want you to do Deborah Sampson. Okay, you can click and pick any of these characters. So we have ones from all different sides and affiliations from all over the revolution. You can pick any of them. Okay, that is fine with me. The only rule that I have is that you don't pick Deborah Sampson, and what I've given you for fun for her instead is a drunk history episode to watch on her. Okay, but you can't pick her to write about because her stories with the drunk history one, it's just it's a little too easy, I think. But for the rest of them, you're going to pick one of them. Okay, and then you're going to do this on this Pear Deck slide right here. You're going to do give us a short summary that tells us some details about that person's life. And then 2, give us like a short paragraph on why that person is significant or worth knowing. What made them distinctive? Like why is their story worth telling and passing on in terms of its significance? Okay, so again, you access these just by clicking on them, and then you do these couple of paragraphs here on Pear Deck just to post. Okay, so that is your assignment officially for the end of this lesson. Okay, and I will see you in our next lesson for the French Revolution. Okay, and I'll also then do kind of a short wrap up as well on how the American Revolution ends. Okay, so good luck with this, and we'll see how you do.